remind us why this meeting is happening and how it's meant to work.
Ros, you might remember when the government was trying to get the COP meeting and it was in a difficult negotiation with Türkiye, it struck a slightly unconventional deal with Türkiye that would basically see that country take on the main presidency and the hosting duties of the main summit, whereas Australia would instead take on the presidency of negotiations. So Chris Bowen has become now the president of negotiations. On top of that, as part of this sweeping deal, the Pacific was also going to get dealt in a meaningful way. And the way that that's been planned is basically to hold a pre-COP meeting in Fiji. So that basically brings a whole lot of officials, business leaders, civil society members and others to Fiji to discuss the agenda and negotiate it ahead of the main COP meeting. And then on top of that, the government had this idea of a pre-COP meeting of leaders in Tuvalu. The idea being that leaders would get on a plane from Fiji to Tuvalu to take a look at one of the countries that is most heavily exposed to the ravages of climate change, to look at not just its exposure and the threat that climate change poses, but also some of the very innovative things that Tuvalu is doing, sometimes with Australia's help, to try and stave off rising sea levels. However, it has proved pretty difficult, Ros, for Australia to get this idea off the ground. The main stumbling block is that it is proving difficult to convince world leaders to make the journey to Tuvalu. And at this stage, very few, if any, world leaders have actually given agreement to come along. So it is proving a very heavy lift for the federal government, and that means, given this is only a couple of months ago, that it's barely got 8 or 9 weeks or so to stave off what could be a bit of a diplomatic embarrassment.
So why is it being so difficult to convince leaders to go?
Well, a host of reasons, Ros. We've spoken to a large number of officials from countries around the world who've been dealing with Australia, and the main problem really seems to come down to a couple of things. One, we're in a very uncertain environment. The Strait of Hormuz is still looking very, very much closed. The economic and energy shocks from that are having really big political impacts, and travelling in that climate is not easy. On top of that, there's the fact that it's only a few weeks, or 6 weeks or so ahead of the main COP, so leaders aren't going to go to both. If they have to choose one or the other, perhaps many of them would prefer to go to the main event rather than the pre-COP. And then, of course, there's the fact that some leaders don't believe there's enough of a substantive agenda at this meeting. One of the things Australia's been pushing leaders to do is to pour money into a new climate fund for Pacific nations that's Pacific-led, but leaders might prefer to do that potentially in Türkiye at the main event rather than at this side one. Now, none of this means that it's necessarily all going to fall over in a heap, Ros. It may well be that Australia can pull this out of the fire, but it is proving very difficult work.
But will it be a diplomatic embarrassment to Australia if no leaders attend?
I think if no leaders outside the Pacific or no leaders outside PIF attend, then that would be a diplomatic embarrassment for Australia, particularly because Australia has pushed this so hard and pushed it as a real opportunity to represent Australian and Pacific interests in particular and Pacific priorities in the lead up to COP. That doesn't mean the event would be a waste of time. The pre-COP, which is much more than just about the leaders, would still go ahead. We'd still have negotiators and others there trying to build momentum ahead of the main event. But if this event with Tuvalu and this leaders meeting falls over, then, yep, undeniably, that's an embarrassment for Australia.